So far, it has been surprisingly good. I mean, I'm not a writer by profession, so I was somewhat skeptical of how people will like it. I enjoyed writing it because it came kind of naturally to me. Um, but I was pleasantly surprised by how many people liked it, and the reviews were all uniformly very, very good. People who read and wrote to me or in social media, including fairly eminent people who I don't know personally. So when they uh, came out and said nice things, that means a lot to me. No, I mean, I didn't plan to write it at all. A friend of mine who is also a publisher, Naveen Kishore, he
Yes.
he runs Seagull Books. We
Yes.
were talking maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when he proposed the idea, and my initial reaction was that I I'm not a writer, and plus it's kind of awkward to write about somebody who is so close. So my initial reaction was not positive, but then I thought more about it, and I thought um, maybe there is a point, because there are so many stories that if I don't record it, these stories will get lost. So at that point, I agreed to write it, and of course, his Naveen's intent was to coincide the publishing with my father's centenary year. So yes, it was not planned from my side, but the publishers planned it, and I finally agreed. Not exactly. I mean, our household was not typically like a glamorous person's household. It was very open. People poured in from the early morning till late. My father was very accessible in that sense. So, no, there was not much press interest till the very end, when he was no longer making films and he became more of an iconic figure. There were, like, for example, I mean, I have never seen any press coming to our house on his birthday. His birthday was basically publicly unknown. But only in the last 20 years, when he was no longer that active, we started seeing a lot of press coming on that morning, so no, I didn't face any kind of media thing. But we were both, my father and even more so my uncle, who was a very popular actor, Ronup Kumar. We lived together, and because of him, I was used to the fact that we are our household is in a public space. So as I went out with my uncle, he was always spotted by people, and they would come and try to talk to him. So that was normal for me. That this is how we are perceived. So that was not. But my father was not a recognizable public figure. Only in much later did he become visually recognizable. Yes, definitely so. I mean, as a child, I I found my father a little eccentric, and I didn't take him seriously at all. But only as I started growing up, when I was 15, around 15, my interests and my horizons started growing out. And only then I started realizing that my father had some interesting things to say. And in our living room, which was the only room we had other than a tiny bedroom, we had a small living room. So that was his place for his adda. So it was filled with people all through, and that was also my room where I studied. So I started taking interest in the conversations that went on. And I realized that why other people are listening to my father seriously. And only then my interest started shifting. I started finding my father more interesting. And of course, he was in our household. I mean, not just my father, but my entire household. I was never treated like a child.
Oh,
We all had equal voice. If even when I was 15 or 16, if a decision had to be made about anything in the household, um, I knew that my voice had the same weight as anybody else. So, in that atmosphere, um, I started taking more interest in the kind of thinking, his films, um, his thought process. My interest also expanded beyond the childhood interests of sports and
hmm.
playing with my friends. So yes, my relationship started changing at that point. The politically at that point, the city was going through a very volatile period, 1969, 70,
Yes.
71. So that also helped um, to create a bond between us. No, actually, that happened in my childhood, and no one exactly remembers, not even my parents. How did I started calling him Bondhu? Uh,
Yeah.
it may have been, that's our guess, that it may have been a playful thing that my father was saying, "Oh, we are two friends," and I picked up on that and started calling him Bondhu. But I was
Yeah.
incredibly um, ashamed of that. I tried to hide it from my friends. Um, it was a very awkward thing. Only after I got beyond my teenage years, I felt comfortable calling him Bondhu publicly. But before that, it was a shameful thing. But there was nothing I could do to change it at that point. It has its um, benefits, but I mostly um, it was a mixed bag. Um, I always grew up never trying to take advantage of his notoriety. Um, there was a event, I think I also mentioned it in the book. His
Yeah.
film Calcutta 71 was released, and it was a very politically
Film.
significant time when the film was released. So it was released only in one theater in Metro Cinema, but there used to be very long queues to buy a ticket because it almost became a political act to see the
Yeah.
film. And somebody I knew, I can't recall who it was, wanted to see the film, and I wanted to sponsor that. So I wanted to buy tickets, but I didn't. That was the culture in our house. It never even occurred to me that I can ask my father or my father's production people to get me two tickets, which they probably could have. So I remember one morning I went there early in the morning and stood in that long line that carved all the way up to Dharmatala Street. And I was standing in the line, and people around me were talking about the film and my father, which was kind of fun to listen to other people. They didn't know who I was. After almost an hour or two, when this line started moving, my father's production manager, Mukul Babu, he came to the theater for some reason, and he spotted me in the line. And he came and
Yes.
he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm trying to buy ticket." He grabbed me my arm and pulled me away. And I was so ashamed that what would my neighbors in the line feel. But that was the atmosphere in our house, that we um, never tried to take um, any advantage of the situation, that he was a well-known person. But other than that, I mean, there were awkward moments too. I mean, even in my younger days, when I would be interested in a girl, I always had that hesitation that if that person shows any interest in me, is she showing interest in me or because of my father? And that was always a debate that worked with me, that am I, because I didn't want to fall into a situation where somebody is taking interest in me not because of me. So these are not the good side of being growing up in a celebrity household. But of course, I also enjoyed the fact that that he was becoming well known, and his films were getting more and more successful, which was not the case in the beginning. I mean, all his films were huge failures, commercially and even critically. I mean, he rarely got a good review in newspapers, but that started changing. And when it started changing after BONDHU, I would say, I of course enjoyed his notoriety, but there was also awkwardness about it. I don't think I ever consciously thought of it, but perhaps my interest I had a natural interest in science and technology from my childhood. Who knows why that happened? But there may have been a factor that I wanted to make my mark my own way, not because of my father. And if I went into films or anything adjacent to filmmaking, I knew that question would come up. That is, if I don't do well, then people will say, "Oh, what a disappointment! What a father, and look at the son." And if I did well, then people would say, "I'm sure his father is helping him." So you cannot win. I mean, you lose either way. So I always dreamed. I mean, that was my daydream, that I'll make my mark. I wanted to make my mark, and growing up with such well-known people, you almost this is another problem, that you almost assume that everyone's fate is to become famous. And so not being famous was not even an option. So in my daydream, in my youthful daydreams, I dreamed of becoming famous, but not as a filmmaker, but as a scientist. As I grew older, and I realized that's not going to happen, and I left actually active science. I'm no longer an active scientist. So that becoming famous didn't happen. But I'm still glad that it wasn't. I made the decisions I made then, that of not following a path that seems a little too easy. And see, I mean, in other areas, if my father was a well-known scientist, that doesn't guarantee that I can enter the world of science. I have to do it by my own means, and I have to write excellent papers that people will take seriously. Only then you can become a great scientist. But in film, there is a strange effect of glamour and easy entry, that if I went into films, I would have had an easier entry point than most other people, right? I mean, it would have been far easier for me to get my first producer, maybe, or make a well-known actor act in my film, all these things become easier if you are in the family. And that's why you see so many people in this kind of mass media follow their parents' footstep, because the entry point becomes easier. And I would say, fortunately, in our household, our training was not so, that the easy path was not the attractive path. I love Calcutta. I mean, of course, what happened is, over the years, we all realized that our love for a place is not really love for a place, it's love for the people. It's not the place. It's not. So it's my attraction to Calcutta is because of the people that I knew out there. And
Yes.
with me being out for almost 40 years, those ties are getting weaker. I still have friends, but am I that as close to them as I was in my college days? Probably not. I mean, we have moved apart. In many cases, we don't think similarly, which is normal with time. So if I imagine going back to Calcutta, which we may do someday, I mean, not during my working days, but that's coming to an end soon. But when I imagine being there, I also realize that I will have to build up my friend circle, because my old friend circle has gradually withered off. I mean, I still have very close friends out there, but it's a very small number. Whereas my friend circle here where I live is much more alive now. Our attraction is really not to a place, it's to the people who make that place. No, even my father, I would say, he grew up with a certain politics, and that defined him in many ways. But he was also a very skeptical person. He was always a skeptical thinker. He, despite his strong association with the Communist Party from his student days, he never became a member. He always wanted to stay outside because he wanted to remain critical. And what I learned from my father is that the need to be critical all the time, to be alert and never accept any ideology or any thought without questions. And he questioned it till the end. I grew up with the same left leanings when I was growing up, but I also started questioning things, that there are things that I liked, things that I didn't agree anymore. And with age, I made a conscious decision not to have any ideology. I don't believe in ideology. I think ideology is a lazy thinker's tool, where you decide, okay, this is my ideology, and then you stop thinking, because then the ideology tells you what is right and what is wrong and how to think. I don't believe in that. I think every thinking person should not give up their independence of thinking to any thought, no matter how strong and how powerful it is, because it takes away your ability to think critically. So me and my father, we had many arguments, but we had also agreed on many things. So I wouldn't say that I have a very definite political ideology. I think seriously about everything. I read as much as I can, and I have my likes and dislikes, but those are all based on my reasoning, and not because there is there is a ism that I follow. See, I mean, that's a good question, because there are at least two types of people who make their home in the West. there are people like us who came through an academic channel, and our association here is people of similar mind, and their nationality is completely immaterial. I have equal number of friends who are of all different nationalities here, and we agree and we enjoy each other because of our similar life of our mind. Then there are people who come here only to make a better living, be it at the low end of the economic strata as migrant workers, or even in the middle tier. You get your engineering degree and you want to make a career, and you find a job somewhere in the West. So my personal experience is not connected to that. I know those people, but I cannot say I am intimately connected with them. So those who are in that state, one distinctive quality you will see when you meet them is their friend circle. Even though they are here, if they are Indian, their entire friend circle remains Indian. They remain in an isolated sort of bubble, and their experience of this country will probably be very different from my experience, or anybody who is like me, who came through academic circuits and decided to stay here because primarily because it was a more conducive place to exercise our thinking. And so it's hard for me to express that that angle. I mean, especially in United States, there are very few or a much smaller number of migrant workers. These are almost all the Indians who come here come with higher degrees and they're engineers and with other technical skills, and they immediately become middle class to upper middle class. Whereas in Europe, you see a lot more of people who come there as less skilled workers, and their experience and how the countries treat them or the population treat them is somewhat different. Migrant problem is not so much people coming from Asia, but coming from South of America, from Mexico and other South American countries. And that situation is terrible because thousands and thousands of people try to migrate into US through the Mexican border, and they are often not welcome politically by some groups. Others are more welcoming. So it's a very complex situation out there, and they are economically needed by the country to do certain jobs that others are not willing to do. I think it's the same thing. The politics has changed. Especially in the West, the fear of immigration has become a political tool for many people, both in Europe and in United States, where some political groups would like to, in the globalized economy, those groups that felt secure before are no longer feeling as secure. So they need somebody to point their finger and blame somebody. And there is a whole brand of politics, both in Europe and in United States, which tries to make an enemy out of the immigrants. And the same thing I'm seeing in India today, that a whole politics depends upon making an enemy out of the immigrant population, that it's your situation is bad because of those people. And that's a dangerous trend, but it's happening everywhere. And I think as the prior generations' middle class feel a little more threatened in a global economy, this will only increase.